Out of, I think it's about 300 songs that John and I wrote together,
For more than 6 decades, Paul McCartney has been celebrated as one of the most gifted songwriters in music history. From the birth of Beatlemania in the 1960s to his legendary solo career, his catalog of songs has shaped generations and become the soundtrack to countless lives. But for fans, one mystery has always remained. Out of the hundreds of timeless tracks the Beatles recorded, which ones does Paul himself hold closest to his heart? It's a question that seems almost impossible to answer. After all, the Beatles' discography is filled with classics, songs that redefined popular music and continue to inspire artists today. But as Paul McCartney reached 80 years old, he finally decided to look back on the band's extraordinary legacy and reveal the 5 Beatles songs that mean the most to him personally. These weren't chosen simply for their commercial success or their iconic status. Instead, Paul's picks reflect the emotions, memories, and experiences tied to each one. Some remind him of moments of pure joy, others of challenges the band overcame, and still others of the deep creative bond he shared with John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. For lifelong fans, McCartney's confession offers something truly rare, a glimpse into how one of the greatest musicians of all time views his own work. It's a chance to understand not just the music, but the man behind it, the moments of inspiration, the hidden stories, and the deep connections that make these songs stand out above all the rest. And perhaps most surprisingly, Paul's list includes songs many fans would never have expected. When Paul McCartney turned 80, the world celebrated not just his age, but his incredible endurance as one of the greatest living songwriters. For decades, he had skillfully dodged the inevitable question that fans and journalists always asked: "What are your favorite Beatles songs?" He would usually smile, deflect, or say it was impossible to choose. But as he grew older, Paul began to reflect more openly on the extraordinary journey he shared with John, George, and Ringo. And in doing so, he finally revealed a carefully chosen list of 5 Beatles songs that he personally cherished most. The first among them was a track that had never topped charts in the same way as Hey Jude or Let It Be, but one that Paul considered uniquely personal. Here, There and Everywhere, written in 1966 for the iconic Revolver album Here. There and Everywhere stood out to McCartney because it embodied a moment of pure creative bliss. He often admitted that the song was directly inspired by the harmonic beauty of the Beach Boys' God Only Knows. Paul had been stunned by Brian Wilson's genius and wanted to create something equally tender, equally timeless. Sitting in John Lennon's house in Weybridge, Paul picked up his guitar and crafted one of the most delicate love songs in the Beatles' entire catalog. Unlike the grand anthems of later years, this song whispered rather than shouted, capturing intimacy in its purest form. What made it special to McCartney wasn't just its melody or its reception, but its deep connection to his own emotions at the time. He was in love with Jane Asher, living the hectic life of a Beatle, but yearning for a simplicity and closeness that fame could never provide. Here, There, and Everywhere became his way of expressing the longing for love that wasn't touched by the chaos of Beatlemania. Paul would later call it probably my favorite of all the songs I've written. Even John Lennon, who wasn't always generous with praise, admitted it was one of McCartney's best compositions. To Paul, that acknowledgement mattered. In the competitive but affectionate rivalry between the two, Lennon's respect for this song confirmed its significance. In concert, McCartney often revisits Here, There, and Everywhere, and he has said that every time he plays it, he feels a quiet pride. It wasn't written to be an anthem. It wasn't crafted for mass hysteria or global impact. It was simply a moment of beauty, captured in a melody that became eternal. And for Paul, it represented the essence of what the Beatles could achieve, music that touched the soul without needing spectacle. When asked why this particular track stood out among so many others, Paul explained that it reminded him of the joy of songwriting itself, the intimacy of sitting with a guitar, the rush of inspiration, the magic of creation. To him, that was what being a Beatle was truly about, more than the fame, more than the hysteria, more than the global tours. It was about those fleeting moments where music seemed to fall from the sky, and all he had to do was catch it. For fans here, there, and everywhere is often seen as a hidden gem. But for McCartney, it was a cornerstone of his life as a songwriter. It represented love, inspiration, and the quiet confidence that his music could endure. And as he looked back at 80, it was the first song he named. Not because it was the most famous, but because it was the truest reflection of who he was. The second song Paul McCartney named among his 5 favorites was one that needed no introduction: Yesterday. Few songs in modern music history have carried such universal appeal, and for McCartney, this haunting ballad was as mysterious as it was defining. Written in 1965 and released on the Help album, Yesterday became one of the most covered songs of all time, with thousands of renditions recorded by artists across every genre imaginable. Yet to Paul, its origins were as strange and magical as the song itself. McCartney has often spoken about the dream that sparked Yesterday. He recalled waking up one morning with a melody playing in his head so fully formed that he assumed it must have already existed. For weeks, he played it to friends and fellow musicians, asking if they had heard it before. When no one recognized it, Paul realized it was his own creation. "It was like it just came to me whole," he said. "I didn't write it so much as discover it." To him, this made the song special. It felt like a gift from somewhere beyond himself. What set Yesterday apart within the Beatles' catalog was its simplicity. Unlike the layered harmonies and energetic performances that had become the band's signature, this track featured only Paul's voice, an acoustic guitar, and a string quartet. It was an intimate, stripped-down performance that marked a turning point for the group. For the first time, a Beatle had stepped forward alone, delivering something deeply personal. This bold departure shocked some at first, but it revealed a new maturity in their music, one that would carry them into the revolutionary albums of the late 1960s. For Paul, the song held a profound emotional resonance. Though the lyrics were written quickly, he later reflected that they seemed to capture universal feelings of loss, regret, and longing. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. It was a sentiment that spoke to heartbreaks everyone experiences, even if Paul himself hadn't lived that exact story at the time. In fact, the working title had been Scrambled Eggs with Nonsense Lyrics, a placeholder while Paul honed the melody. Yet when the final words came, they fit so perfectly, it felt inevitable. Over the years, Paul has admitted that Yesterday remained one of his proudest accomplishments, but it also became something of a burden. It was so famous, so widely adored, that it almost overshadowed everything else he wrote. "I used to joke that I'd written a few songs besides Yesterday," he once said with a smile. Still, he never denied the special place it held in his heart. He knew that it had connected with people on a level few songs ever could, and he took pride in being the one who brought it into the world. Even John Lennon, who sometimes bristled at Paul's more melodic and sentimental tendencies, recognized the power of Yesterday. He once remarked that while it wasn't his kind of song, he couldn't deny its brilliance. Coming from John, that acknowledgement spoke volumes. For Paul, who always valued Lennon's opinion, it validated what he already felt: that Yesterday was one of those rare songs destined to outlive them all. In his concerts, McCartney continues to perform Yesterday, often alone with just an acoustic guitar. Audiences fall silent, listening with the same awe as if hearing it for the first time. Paul has said those moments remind him why the song matters. Not because of its record-breaking success, but because it still moves people decades later. "That's the real test," he explained. "If a song can still make someone feel something, then it's done its job." At 80, when McCartney finally revealed his favorite Beatles songs, including Yesterday, was inevitable. It wasn't just about the song's place in history, but about what it meant to him personally. It represented the mystery of creativity, the joy of discovery, and the power of music to transcend time. It was the song that seemed to come to him from a dream, and in many ways, it became the dream of his career, the one melody that reminded him, more than any other, of why he became a songwriter in the first place. The third Beatles song Paul McCartney named among his personal favorites was one that perfectly captured the spirit of friendship, resilience, and shared humanity that defined the band at their best. Hey Jude, released in 1968, during one of the most turbulent times in both the Beatles' career and the world itself, the song became not only one of the band's greatest commercial successes, but also one of the most powerful anthems of hope ever written. For McCartney, it was more than just a hit single. It was a deeply personal message, born out of compassion that took on a life of its own. The origins of Hey Jude lie in Paul's relationship with John Lennon's young son, Julian. In 1968, John's marriage to Cynthia Lennon was collapsing as he began his life with Yoko Ono. Paul, who had grown close to Julian over the years, felt concerned about the boy and wanted to comfort him during the painful transition. Driving to visit Cynthia and Julian, Paul began singing to himself, "Hey Jules, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better." The melody and the words came naturally, almost instinctively. Later, he changed Jules to Jude, thinking it sounded better in the song. But the heart of the message remained the same, a simple offering of comfort to a child caught in circumstances beyond his control. What made the song so remarkable, and why Paul treasured it, was how it expanded beyond its origins. Though written for Julian, Hey Jude became a universal anthem of encouragement. Its message of resilience, of facing hardship with courage and hope, resonated with millions around the world. For Paul, this was the essence of great songwriting, creating something so personal that it somehow became universal. In the studio, Hey Jude was revolutionary. At over 7 minutes long, it broke the conventions of pop singles at the time. Many executives at first believed radio stations would never play such a lengthy track. But Paul and the band insisted it remain uncut, trusting in the song's power. Their gamble paid off. Hey Jude topped charts around the world, staying at #1 in the U.S. for 9 consecutive weeks, the longest run of any Beatles single. Paul has often spoken about the recording sessions, remembering how electric the atmosphere felt as they built the song layer by layer. The famous extended coda, the repeated refrain of "na na na," wasn't just filler. It became the emotional climax, an invitation for everyone to join in. In fact, Paul explained that was exactly the point, to create a communal, uplifting experience that carried listeners along until the very end. Yet behind the triumphant release, there was tension. John Lennon initially thought the song was about him and his relationship with Yoko, interpreting it as Paul's way of giving his blessing. Paul always denied this, though he admitted John's interpretation was understandable. Regardless, the song's power lay in its openness. It could mean something different to everyone, and that was part of its magic. Over the years, Hey Jude became one of Paul's proudest achievements. He has performed it countless times across the globe, often using it as the finale of his concerts. Watching tens of thousands of people singing together in unison, he has said, is one of the greatest joys of his life. For him, it is proof of music's ability to bring people together, to heal, and to inspire. At 80, when Paul reflected on his career, Hey Jude was an obvious choice for his list of favorite Beatles songs. It wasn't just because of its commercial success or its historical significance. It was because of what it represented: compassion for a child, the universality of shared struggle, and the triumph of hope over despair. For Paul, the song embodied the best of what the Beatles could offer the world: music that was deeply human, music that could carry people through even the darkest times. And in many ways, Hey Jude also reflected Paul's own philosophy of life. He has often described himself as an optimist, someone who tries to find light even in difficult moments. The song captured that spirit perfectly, reminding both himself and the world that sadness could be transformed, and that even the heaviest burdens could be lifted by love, music, and community. The fourth Beatles song Paul McCartney chose as one of his all-time favorites was Let It Be, a track that carried not only artistic weight, but also deep spiritual significance for him. Released in 1970 on the band's final studio album, the song came at a time when the Beatles were unraveling. Tensions were high, friendships strained, and the group's once unbreakable bond seemed beyond repair. Amid this chaos, McCartney found inspiration in a dream that, would give birth to one of the most iconic songs in music. History, Paul has often recalled, the dream that led to Let It Be. During the stressful recording sessions of the late 1960s, he dreamt of his late mother, Mary, who had died when he was just 14. In the dream, she appeared to him with a message of comfort. "It's going to be okay. Just let it be." Those simple words became the foundation of a song that offered peace and reassurance, not only to Paul, but to millions who would hear it. Unlike many Beatles tracks, Let It Be wasn't about romance or social commentary. It was about solace, finding calm in the middle of turmoil. For Paul, the song carried a dual significance. On a personal level, it was a tribute to his mother, whose memory continued to guide him even decades after her death. On a broader level, it was a statement of acceptance during one of the most tumultuous periods in the band's history. As the Beatles fell apart, Let It Be became a kind of farewell anthem, a message that, despite disagreements and heartbreak, there was still beauty in what they had created together. The recording sessions for Let It Be were notoriously difficult. The Get Back project, as it was originally called, was supposed to bring the band back to their roots, but instead it exposed their fractures. Arguments between Paul, John, and George created an uncomfortable atmosphere. Yet in the middle of this, Paul brought in Let It Be, and its quiet grace stood in stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Even John, often skeptical of Paul's more sentimental songs, respected its power. When the track was finally released as a single in March 1970, it became an immediate classic. Its gospel-like structure, soulful piano, and Paul's heartfelt vocal delivery gave it a timeless quality. The line, "When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me," resonated with listeners worldwide, regardless of faith or background. To some, it was a hymn. To others, a mantra. For Paul, it was a message from his mother, preserved in song. Over the years, Let It Be grew to symbolize far more than Paul's personal story. It became a song people turned to in moments of grief, uncertainty, and hardship. McCartney himself has spoken about how humbled he feels by the way the song continues to comfort others. Fans have told him that Let It Be carried them through illness, loss, or personal struggles. For Paul, this gave the song a legacy beyond anything he could have imagined. At his concerts, Let It Be remains one of the most emotional moments of the night. As he plays the opening piano chords, the crowd often falls into silence, listening with reverence. Paul has admitted that performing the song brings him back to that dream of his mother, reminding him of her enduring presence in his life. At 80, when he reflected on his favorite Beatles songs, this one was inevitable, not just because of its beauty, but because it was tied to the most profound and personal memory of his youth. For McCartney, Let It Be is more than music. It is a reminder that peace can be found even in the darkest times, and that acceptance can often bring healing where resistance cannot. It was born from pain, written in chaos, and yet it carried a message of hope that still resonates decades later. By naming Let It Be among his favorites, Paul was also acknowledging the role it played in his own survival. It helped him through the loss of his mother, the breakup of the Beatles, and the many challenges that followed. And as he reached 80, the song stood as a reflection of the wisdom he had gained through a lifetime of triumphs and struggles. Sometimes the only answer is to let things be.